Welcome to Boomcast. I'm Sam, and in this episode, we're talking about pyro. We're talking drones. And pyro on drones.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
This is a behind-the-scenes dive into the grand public display at the 2024 Pyrotechnics Guild International Convention on August 9th in Brainerd, Minnesota.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So, Spirit of 76 Fireworks teamed up with Verge Aero and Astro Magic FX for a second year in a row to produce another massive drone pyro multimedia display at PGI. If you're unfamiliar with our collaboration from last year, you might recognize the viral clip of a giant drone-rendered robot with laser eyes shooting at the ground. That show featured 850 drones and just under 450 pyro cues, not including flames or DMX. This year's show was even bigger, with nearly 1,800 drones and over 1,600 pyro cues, which, for the record, 1,600 firework cues is relatively not that big for a PGI Grand Public display.
For a grand public display at PGI for fireworks, it's relatively small. There's not that much fireworks in the show, like comparatively. But again, it was learning where the boundaries should be and how you put the images together and the two mediums together. So we wanted to be a little bit more conservative and learn where those lines were rather than just like stomp it out and blow it out.
If you don't recognize his voice, that's Peter Rogoz, VP of 76 Pro Line and the producer/creative director of this display. I also caught up with Joel Robinson on site. He's Verge Aero's lead drone pilot for this production.
This show, in my opinion, is going to be even more coordinated than last year. Last year we had a really big wow factor with the robot head shooting lasers down onto the ground with fireballs. This year I feel like the drones and the ground interact with each other in a way we have not done before. The show is approximately 20 minutes long. The drone flight is about 18 of that.
Not only did this year's show have 2 to 3 times as much stuff going on as last year, some of these drones had fireworks being shot from them.
So we currently have 90 drones equipped with pyrotechnics. In this show, we have up to 4 cues per drone. We're using a custom bracket that attaches to the bottom of our X1 drone. Attached on that bracket is a firing system. We're using the FireOne 4Q module. And we have pyrotechnic devices attached to that bracket that point downward. All of them are facing down, including waterfalls and a few comets.
Yeah, so the idea was to build off of what we did last year. We tried to get drones and pyro to interact together for the first time last year. And we were pretty successful, but it was somewhat limited in scope of what we did. What we were trying to do here is tell more of a story and figure out a way that the fireworks and the soundtrack and the drone imagery is enough that it actually drives the entire narrative all the way through. Last year was kind of like just some really cool moments, but it wasn't necessarily a cohesive story. This was our first attempt of, let's try to tell a story, and then we put pyro and drones together in places where they make sense to either drive the story or create beautiful imagery or something like that. We definitely learned a lot. I mean, this was the first time for everybody to try this stuff. It's definitely not easy, but it's really cool that we got to do this because now it goes into the pyro world and all the other pyros and drone folks are going to take this and they're going to build on it and they're going to bring their creativity to it and bring it back to the community, and it's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. It was only a year ago that we did the pyro drone thing for the first time. Now a year later we come back with this production. A year from now, who knows what people are going to be doing. It's really cool seeing it grow.
There's this very specific scene where the waterfalls are going to be used to replicate a rocket engine that will ignite and boost the rocket into the sky. There are other sequences that include chases, which is where the comets come into play, that essentially like a drop comet that shoots down. And there's another scene where the comets shoot down, as well as the ground shooting back up. Any device we use on the drones, we definitely test in advance because they can absolutely have problems if it's too powerful. So for example, all the effects we're using in tonight's show were tested earlier in the week.
All right, so when these last two go, we can hit the next cue.
Yep. Hit it.
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah. Those are beautiful, though. Yeah, they are.
To date, there have only been a few public displays in the United States where pyro was rigged onto drones.
It does feel like we're very much on a frontier here, very Wild West. Like, there's no instructions for this, there's no best practices, there's no info except for us flying around a few drones and trying things, and then doing productions like this at places like PGI, so you can really take a chance and do an experiment and then learn a bunch about what works and what doesn't, and where there's opportunities.
As Peter mentioned, to push the boundaries beyond our 2023 display, it wasn't just about creating a few impact-heavy scenes where the drones would interact with fireworks. He wanted to establish a narrative.
The original concept for the show was humans' interaction with space, the past, present, and future of our interaction in space. The unique part of this show is, though, you actually have to find music that tells the story and informs the story. As I got closer to finishing the soundtrack, we were originally going to have a bunch of narration in the show. We actually had like a screenplay, if you will, written out of dialogue and everything to like drive the story forward. Wow. That, however, like I felt like it cheapened it a little bit, and so I just started really digging through speeches and audiobooks and stuff about space, and I found the Cosmos name came from bookending it with that Neil deGrasse Tyson dialogue at the beginning and the Carl Sagan dialogue at the end. Those were just really powerful, I think, narratives that told the story on our behalf, so we didn't have to do the narration, we didn't have to do the voiceover, we let them do it for us.
Herman Melville in Moby Dick spoke for wanderers in all epochs and meridians. He said, "I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas."
Speaking as someone who's intrigued both by space exploration and badass drone pyro integrations, this show was a delight. It was obviously not the biggest display in terms of firework saturation and queue count, which sure might seem counterintuitive being presented as the final show at the largest pyrotechnic convention in the US, but the PGI provides this unique opportunity for experimentation and artistry to push the bounds of pyrotechnic entertainment. The goal here was quality over quantity. And not only did 76 source some of the highest quality fireworks in terms of effects, the design team challenged the limits of drone-to-pyro proximity. Here's Peter in our podcast episode.
I think what was unique here is we did the closest, physically closest drones to fireworks, and also timing-wise closest sequences of drones and fireworks working together, to where there's a giant image in the sky and then it goes away and suddenly there's a bunch of shells. That means those drones have to be in a different space than those shells. So we had to reanimate things, move them around, tuck them into places. It was really a learning experience on navigating all that.
Cosmos may not meet everyone's standards for pyro saturation, but as far as artistry and innovation, it was pretty amazing to witness.
Hey, Jason Root from Pyro Talk, and I just got done watching the best drone and fireworks integration show I've ever seen. I'm not kidding. This was world class. There's great things going around the world. Right here in Brainerd, Minnesota at PGI 2024, Spirit of 76, Verge Aero, and so many different partners put on one heck of a show. I'm not kidding. World class right here in the US of A in the great Midwest. Love it.
Thank you, Jason. So how does a fireworks wholesaler, a display company, and a network of drone companies pull off such a major experimental show? It takes a lot of firing equipment for starters.
We used a FireOne system, a StarFire system, a Cobra system, Galaxis flames, Spark Fabrica 180 flames. It was a lot of systems talking together, all driven by timecode. So that was really difficult too. It's like, how do we get all these machines to talk to each other, stay in sync? As a production goes, that's difficult. As a creative production goes, where you're trying to like create the whole thing and then make the machines do what you needed to do, it's even harder. Like you're gluing many pieces together.
And it takes a lot of drones.
1,800 drones is a lot of drones to fit in this show space, especially when you have fireworks going off at all different distances within the field. So the biggest issue we had was being able to deconflict the fireworks and the drones, because obviously we want to make sure nothing gets damaged during the show. And so to do this, we obviously studied the firework render as well as our drone render and ensured that certain elements were either moved to the left, to the right, back, further away from breaking shells or any large effects.
Drones can only fly for like 9 to 12 minutes. So there were several flights of drones throughout the show. So there was only one moment where almost all 1,800 were in the sky. The rest of the time you were actually seeing smaller flights of drones going up and doing images and then landing, and another one goes up, fills in.
So this launch pad has 900. There are 5 total launch pads, and the reason for that is because the launch pads are going at different times throughout the show to ensure that there's always drones doing something within the sky. So for example, a fleet will take off, perform the first little bit of the show, another fleet will take off to join that first fleet into the sky. At another point, the pyrotechnic fleet will take off and join as well. The pyrotechnic fleet is split up into 2 smaller launch pads, and then there's an additional launch pad that will also join the fleet at some time. At one point in time, the entire fleet will be in the sky together, but for the most part of it, it'll be some variation of a fleet in the sky.
The Verge team really understood the story from the first time I pitched it to them, and then they were able to add some really key moments and some really cool imagery where we had some blank spots. For instance, I had no animations in mind for that Carl Sagan quote. They said, "We're just going to land the drones," and I was like, they're like, yeah, because like you tell the whole story, it's about space. That last quote is about the people themselves, the audience themselves, right? It's very like reflective about people and us and what we're doing. And he's like, so let's just land the drones and let everybody just kind of reflect for a minute. And then you guys just like blow it out with a pyro finale. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's better than, yeah. And it worked.
There's a good reason why we're just starting to see drone and pyro integrated displays within the past few years. It is not easy.
There were a lot of unique challenges to this show of combining pyro and drones. The most simple one is if you have fireworks on the ground launching into the sky, you can't have the fireworks in the sky occupying the same space as the drones in the sky. Now, the unique thing we had about this shoot site, which is something we discovered early on and discussed and actually built into the design, was the depth. We had a lot of room behind the fireworks to fly drones and some room in front of the fireworks and quite a bit to the sides. So we had to design scenes in such a way that they allowed for enough depth that they would allow the drones to move out of the way for fireworks and then move back into place when they needed to come back. So when you saw that scene with like the telescope into the sky, that was quite a bit of depth, and that was where Verge was very excited to be able to play with that much depth, because it's not something they usually get to do. So they were like, this is cool, we're going to have drones up here with one kind of object, and it's going to be looking at a farther object, and we can have the two moving in space. And that actually worked with our design too, because they moved out and created a gap for our fireworks and then moved back in when they needed to. With the nebula, with the comet drops, that becomes a safety thing. Like, you have to have the drones far enough that if comets fall and the wind catches them, they're not going to get near the audience or anything. And also, that nebula was relatively tight in that there were shell launches pretty much right after we wiped away the big image. We had shell launches and single shot launches. So they actually tucked to that nebula rotated the entire time, and it tucked itself between our comets and our shells. And then they held there just long enough to come back and do the land pattern. So it's like all those considerations that you can't really figure out until you've got the show designed, basically. And then you go, oh shit, we gotta move this image over there, or we gotta slide this pyro cue over, or we gotta go lower level effects here. Like, it's...
And then you're up until 3 a.m. on the shoot day.
Then you're up until 3 a.m. The night before the show, just sliding cues around. And the hard part is, most of the fireworks were loaded during that time, right? So we're still making changes to the timing and the pyro and all that, but it's loaded. Whatever you have loaded is what you can change now. You can't just make new pyro appear and new racks and all that. So that's hard too, and that takes a team that really knows what they're doing. We track versions of the show. We start with a 1.0, and then if you have a major revision, it jumps to like a 2.0 or 3.0. The one that flew was 7.7, version 7.7.
Dang.
Yeah.
You also have to orchestrate getting in the equipment, getting in the product, and getting in 1,800 drones. In fact, Joel said this was Verge Aero's largest drone show attempt yet.
We invited all of our customers out to bring their drones, and we just said, whatever drones you bring out, that's what we're gonna fly. And so that's how we landed with 1,800. So we have many different customers on site, some that brought drones, some that didn't.
Verge Aero had 9 of their customer companies on site, 7 of which provided drones. We also brought in Pyro from Italy. Not only did we have 7.6 Proline Italia, we also had some 1.3 shells, also manufactured by the one and only Giuliani Fireworks.
We had just over 500 shells from Giuliani Fireworks in the show. Giuliani builds incredible fireworks, and it's really a privilege to be able to use those types of products in a show like this.
These were transported to PGI for us by J&M Displays. This was more than a Spirit of 76/Verge Aero production. Thank you to Astro Magic FX, the Pyro producer, handling most of our logistics and setup. Thanks again to J&M Displays for transporting the Italian 1.3, and to Giuliani Fireworks for manufacturing those incredible shells. Thank you to the plethora of drone companies who provided Verge with additional drones and on-site assistance. We did have some pretty big tech difficulties in the hours leading up to the show, which we discuss in our post-PGI recap podcast episode. Thanks to Ace Pyro for providing last-minute StarFire equipment, and to all the PGI members who hit the field to help us get the show off the ground. Thanks also to the Pyrotechnic Guild International, all staff, all volunteers, all organizers. You're amazing. It's been a couple of weeks since PGI, so Peter and I brought Joel and Chris back onto the podcast.